we have somebody whose name is Phil-oginy. That's what they told the call screener.
Nice.
Phil-oginy, it says in the notes, the reliability of the Gospels and who wrote them. How much weight should we give to church tradition and other secondary sources? Phil, you're live with Eric and Drew.
Awesome. Well, you pretty much hit it right on the head. I'm curious because I find a lot of sources, including church scholarship or religious scholarship, that says that the Gospels are not actually written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And part of me is like, okay, I'm inclined to believe that. And that seems like confirmation bias because I'm an atheist. So then I go and I look at religious sources, and there's a lot on there that talks about like apostolic succession and how we know based on a chain of custody for people like Tertullian and Polycarp and Ignatius and all the things that they wrote that were a little bit more contemporary that seem to confirm whether or not these things were eyewitness. Now, I don't believe the things just because of the supernatural claims that are in them. Like there might be some truth in there as far as the names of places and people and stuff like that, but that doesn't mean that it's all true, right? So I'm just curious, if we step back from just looking at the narrative and we actually look at that chain of custody throughout history, where do these discrepancies come from? And why does the church get to be like, oh no, church tradition says it's this and everybody believes that it's true? Does that make sense?
It's a good question. And God, I feel like I can so strongly sympathize with where you're at on it right now, which I'm sure I've discussed this with both Eric and V. You're at like the peak, which is the bottom of the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's like you were really ignorant on it, and so you had a certain amount of confidence, and you knew a few facts, and you had high confidence. And the more and more and more and more you learned, your confidence just went down and down and down and down. And now you're down here, way more educated than most people. And you're like, I'm not sure. Like, I think I know, but I could be wrong. And I want to second guess myself. I don't want to give in to confirmation bias.
Right.
It's a bit of a paradox. But if you've gotten to the point where you are really worried about your confirmation bias kicking in after you've consumed sources on both sides, like ad nauseum,
okay, I wouldn't call it
probably you're probably informing yourself well enough to be confident at this point.
All right, awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that you would agree that when it comes to the apostolic succession thing, there are many different branches of Christian tradition that all claim apostolic succession. Which apostle, which church father was the one that was right? I'm sure that you realize that Tertullian did not agree completely with Polycarp, and who didn't agree completely with Ignatius, who didn't completely agree with any of the 12 apostles. We don't even know who all of them were. Who also didn't agree with, Origen. It's
right.
Like I said earlier, there's a human problem. We disagree on things. There's inherently diversity. And I think that these chain of apostolic succession arguments really only work if we can discern whose subjective opinion is the objective one. And I don't think that we can really decide what the objective answer is based on interpretation of scriptures and things like that. Maybe if we had archaeological evidence of this person had the first scroll that was written about this, and the scroll was written by somebody who was an eyewitness, and then this scroll was passed down, this chain through several years, and there's actual archaeological physical evidence that some authoritative source was in possession of only this sect. But we just don't have that. So we have to interpret the text for ourselves and just decide who's right based on interpretation. There's not a lot of certainty there. And it sounds like you perfectly well understand that at this point. Give yourself some credit.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, because it sounds like if one of the things that tripped me up, okay, the Marcionites, are you familiar with that sect?
Yes. Yeah, I've done a whole video on Marcion, yeah.
Yeah, so the Marcionites have the oldest gospel in the world, and aren't they also Unitarians? Like, they compiled it first into a thing, and so they can claim to be the oldest, have the oldest canon, if you will, even older than I think the Nicene, the stuff that was decided on during the Council of Nicaea and stuff like that. But like, then why aren't they the most popular? You know, it's like it was all just power and politics that caused Christianity to go the way it went. So then how can that possibly be true? I don't know. There's just a lot going on there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, there is a lot going on there. I will say, so it is a misconception that the Council of Nicaea decided on anything related to the canon. That's like probably the most popular misconception about New Testament history or study. So I don't blame you for voicing that. The Council of Nicaea decided on a few things, but one of them was whether or not the church was going to affirm Arianism, like basically this idea that God and, God the Father and God the Son were like two separate beings and one was subordinate to the other. And eventually, they decided that Jesus was equal to God and Jesus was fully man and fully God. And in a way, that's kind of the Trinity. I don't know that they actually use that term, but think of the Council of Nicaea, the first Council of Nicaea, as having more to do with the nature of God and Jesus, not so much the canon. But gotcha. Yes, you're exactly right that there are the Marcionites did have the first canon in Christian history as far as we can tell. And why does that not give them, authority to rule over the rest? Well, I mean, even the Catholic Church today and the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Ethiopian Orthodox churches don't go based on just the idea that they have the right canon. They also are like, hey, we have apostolic succession. We have these traditions that we're taught that don't have anything to do with having a canon or not. And I think that honestly, you just said it best when you said, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there. It's really complicated. That's honestly just the correct view to have. It's just not simpler than that.
Okay. One final question then. Can you point me in the direction of when and where the canon was decided on? Because I knew that the Council of Nicaea did the Arian, took care of the Arian heresy, but I'm curious. I guess I kind of also thought that that's where they started to decide on biblical canon. Was the canon decided before that or after that?
So the canon was decided on. This is I think the reason why this misconception is so common, because the answer cannot fit even in a single sentence. The canon was decided on over actually hundreds of years. You could argue more than 1,000 years. There were bishops people like Irenaeus, people like Tertullian, people like Origen, people hundreds of years after them, not just in the first few Christian centuries, who were arguing over what books were authoritative and which ones weren't, and what authoritative even means. There were a lot of people that were arguing about the canon and what books we should use, that were arguing about that subject before the idea that the Bible or any of the books were divinely inspired was introduced in the first place.
Oh, wow.
So ideas of what should be canon, before most people took on the idea of divine inspiration of these texts in the first place, wasn't even the same conversation. It wasn't which books are inspired by God. It was which ones do we like the most and we want to use and might be the most historically accurate and match my personal theology and biases the most, and which ones are the most misogynistic or which ones are the least misogynistic, which ones create the best society, which ones create the worst society. It's so incredibly complicated that you can't fit the answer to this in a bullet point, right? I will say, I might be wrong. Do Google this. Look this up after I say this to see whether or not I'm getting the name right. I believe it was Athanasius of Alexandria, who was at the Council of Nicaea, but was very young at the time, who first sent a letter to, it was either another council or to another bishop, or I think he might have just circulated this letter publicly, which did dictate that he believed that the church should use this set of books And that canon list of his was very, very, very similar to the roughly 26 books of the New Testament that we have today. The thing is that after that letter was circulated, yes, that idea did gain popularity, but it took a really long time for people to decide that that's the canon. And I think you could argue that because there are different Bibles and different traditions, we still haven't decided what the canon is. So that's that's the real answer.
That's a nice application of logic. All right. I think you guys, thank you guys for the conversation, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Not every day that I get to geek out on that one.
Drew, you killed that. That was amazing. And the entire time you're talking, there's a Catholic caller waiting on the line who had a totally different question. And I am just like, ooh, I want to see how this plays out. But yeah, thank you. That was fantastic.